What's up? Welcome back to my channel, or for the first time if you're new, I'm Sylvan, and today I'm going to be reacting to Soldier Zero Anby's character teaser, Death and Rebirth. Between that title and this thumbnail, I am quite intrigued already. I'm not going to delay things too much, I'm really eager to get into this. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, leave a comment on your thoughts, and let's get into this. Alright, where are we going to get here? Replica number 0.
Awakening sequence ready to begin.
Okay.
Rise and shine, Anby.
Is this her first time waking up, or is this something else? Oh, that's a character that we don't recognize.
Awaiting your orders. Good girl.
Who is that? Ooh, okay.
Target training module complete. Data collection.
Yeah, this
complete.
feels like when she first woke up.
Good girl, well done.
I don't know how
This
I feel
is why
about
you're my
her saying it
favorite.
that way.
Well then, let's move on to the final test.
Okay.
Now.
Oh.
Life.
What the fuck?
Understood. Replica 0. Following orders. Her stats are good. Patch her up and send her to field training.
Oh my god? Whoa.
Just as we expected.
Jesus
You're
Christ.
the only one who made it through this operation. Anne was right. You are the perfect one. Go dispose of number 11.
Oh.
Participate in the operation. The Silver Company research is being shut down.
Okay, so this is the disaster that happened, and 11's the only other person alive. Okay, I understand a lot now.
Anby, this is an order.
And this is the
Replica
first
number
time
0.
that
Are
she
you defying
doesn't
orders?
follow orders, she defies. To not kill Soldier 11, she'd rather kill herself? Oh my god! She'd rather kill herself than kill Soldier
You
11.
miscalculated. A machine without absolute loyalty is worthless.
Okay, they're describing her as a machine.
Good thing we haven't disposed of number 11 yet.
We'll use her instead. As for the defect, just dump it somewhere.
Oh, but she didn't fully die. She survived. Oh my god. What is this? Oh. Oh.
I have a feeling there's a hidden treasure
And then
around
Nicole finds her.
here. Whoa. Is this supposed to be my treasure?
Wow. Okay, well that answers pretty much every question. Okay, we have a lot to touch on here. So if I am understanding this correctly, what we are seeing here is initially the first time that Anby wakes up. She is replica number 0 after all. She was the first. We see that her pod is the only one, and there is an automated voice saying replica number 0 standing by, awakening sequence ready to begin. Whoever these scientists are who designed these replicas, we still don't know if they're fully machine, partially machine, biological clones. It's still not 100% clear, but they did refer to her as a machine later, but she also seems to have blood and need to eat, based on just what we've experienced so far with her as a character. So it's still not 100% clear, but regardless, we then have the voice of what I'm guessing is probably the head scientist on this whole operation, saying, "Rise and shine, Anby," meaning that Anby is a name that she had at this point. If she is a fully constructed and designed machine or clone, then that means that this scientist named her that. Or somebody did, at least. And if we're going more the modification route, which feels more and more unlikely at this point, then I guess it was just her name. But regardless, it's an interesting detail that this scientist woman refers to her as Anby, not Soldier 0, or Replica 0. Because based on everything else we see about the attitude of this scientist, she does not care about Anby as a person. But we have Anby opening her eyes, potentially for the first time, and seeing this scientist. And she has just distinct enough of a design that I feel like it's impossible we won't see her again somewhere. Whether she ends up being an NPC that shows up in Anby's story, or someday shows up as a playable character herself, who knows? But she's just distinctive enough that I feel like she will reappear at some point. But at this point, Anby is still a loyal soldier. If she is truly a clone or a machine, she hasn't had enough time or experience or life to live to realize what she cares about and why she should or shouldn't follow orders. So her only response is replica number 0, awaiting your orders. And something about the tone of the scientist is very disturbing, intentionally so, as she is very pleased about almost everything that Anby does. It's clear that this scientist is invested in her, but not in a way that they actually care about her. It clearly is more so they're invested in her as an experiment, almost. She's a scientist that is happy to see that her experiment has been a success, not she is someone there encouraging and comforting a person that she just created, essentially. But then we jump to Anby having concluded a training module, presumably some early combat training to see if she is up to the task of being whatever kind of soldier they need her to be, and it seems that she is up to the task, as the scientist looks at the data for a bit before saying, "Good girl, well done." And once again, there's that tone of hers that is just icky. I get the ick from this. And then, of course, she has a name tag here, like an ID, but it is obscured. There isn't any actual text on it, so we can't make out what her name or anything would be. But she continues and says, "This is why you're my favorite." The words themselves could have positive connotation, encouraging connotation, but the tone makes it feel like the scientist is distant and detached from Anby. She's not seeing Anby, she's seeing the experiment, as I have sort of tried to get at. But what adds to this also is we never see her eyes in any of this. They're either blocked out by her glasses or we only see the bottom half of her face. We never see the person, we just see the disturbing smile. But clearly the testing must go on, and it is time for the final test. And before we get to that test, something that I want to emphasize is how blank-faced Anby is here. She has just a dead stare. She isn't looking at anything, she isn't focusing on anything, she isn't moving, her attention isn't changing, she is just listening, waiting for orders. And it's here with this final test that the disturbing nature of this woman comes to a head. She gives this final command, "End your life." And she says so with a smile. And we have this moment where we see Anby grip her blade. It's unclear if that's just her readying to do the deed, or if it is a level of tension, perhaps even the first instance of her hesitating or questioning. But regardless, she still says, with basically no real hesitation, "Understood, Replica 0 following orders." And it's as this is said that we can almost see the eye of the scientist, but it is blocked out by the reflection of her glasses. And in that reflection, we see Anby. To extrapolate out the meaning of this visual more, it isn't just that we are blocked out from seeing the full face of the scientist. More specifically, we're not seeing their eyes, which often has the connotation of being the windows to the soul. And even more than that in this shot, we have Anby and the scientist not only separated by physical space, seeing as the scientist is looking at a monitor which Anby is on, but also there is this barrier of our gaze, which in a way could be interpreted as Anby's as well, is not just being blocked but reflected back at us. There is a complete lack of contact with this woman, emotionally or in any real way. There's complete separation going on. And we have Anby pull the blade up to her throat. And we don't see the killing blow because that would be, I think, too much for what the rating that typically Zenless and Hoyoverse goes for. We don't typically see on-screen brutal deaths. But we have the sign that this has happened, with everything going red. For a moment, it can be interpreted as perhaps something has gone wrong, as it says no signal or error or whatever, but that clearly is more meant to be just the idea that something is wrong about this, more than anything else. But despite that, the scientist is just chuckling, smiling. They're amused to see someone follow the order to kill themselves. Someone they created, if we're to go with the idea that Anby is a clone or a machine. Now, of course, part of this can be understood by the fact that she understands they can just patch her up and she can keep going. It doesn't change the brutality or the cruelty of it, but it does take it a singular step back that this isn't just mindless cruelty for the sake of cruelty. It is more so cruel experimentation. There is a purpose to this, no matter how dark and depraved. Now, of course, you could probably get these same results to establish Anby's loyalty that don't include such brutality and cruelty, but it does get the job done in that way, no matter how brutal and wrong. But as she walks away from the screen, she just says to someone presumably off screen or whatever, patch her up and send her to field training. One thing this does tell us is that either their technology here is so incredibly advanced that they essentially can bring people back to life, or something about the design and physiology of Anby and potentially the other replicas makes them, with enough resources put into repairing them, essentially immortal, which is interesting. It much more leans things, in my mind, towards the idea of Anby and the other replicas being more like androids, machines made to be like living people, because that to me has a much more reasonable degree of the capacity to essentially revive someone from the dead. If they're a machine that can be repaired, that makes a lot more sense than if they are a fully biological person. But who knows? We don't know the exact technology level of this base. If they are clones, they have full cloning technology. Who knows what else they have? But here I feel like is also a good point to just sort of acknowledge something that this has in the back of my head sort of reminded me of for a while, but even more so with this teaser. Anby and all of the soldiers from Silver Squad, all of these replicas, very much make me think of Nier Automata in a way. And I can't help but have some of those ideas of machines that are like humans and what humanity truly is, and all the weird ideas related to that. I can't help but have some of those worm their way into my brain when I'm seeing stuff like this. But to move on, we get a close-up shot of Anby lying there, essentially dead, if not truly dead. The blood splattered on the ground. We don't see the actual wound, but that makes an amount of sense. It would have been on the left side of her neck, and she is facing down, where the left side of her neck would be facing towards the ground. But we do still get this look of essentially her corpse. But then we transition to much later in the timeline, where that was the testing of Anby when she was the only replica so far. We now have this row of empty pods coated in red light as a voice separate from the original scientist says, as to be expected, you're the only one who made it through this operation. And it becomes very quickly clear here that what they're referring to is Anby, leader of Silver Squad, had led some kind of operation with replicas 1 through 10, or less of them if some of them had already died prior, and something horrible had happened. We had hints of this in the version trailer when Anby mentions everyone being crushed by the rubble and her not understanding how she survived, and now we're beginning to get more tidbits of that and more answers about that. We still don't know what that operation was, but we get a few quick glimpses of it, and we understand what Anby means when she says she doesn't know how she survived. We get this brief shot between lines of Anby at like hip level, where we can see how tattered and damaged her outfit is. In all likelihood, it's more so representing the damage of this one specific operation, but also does a good job of emphasizing the wear of time in such a cruel environment. But then this man speaks. Once again, this is another case we can't see their eyes. We never see the eyes of the people who are responsible for these experiments. But this man says, Anne was right, you are the perfect one. Which does two things. One, it gives us the name of presumably this scientist, Anne. The fact that we get her name here just emphasizes the point I was making earlier, that I feel like she has to show up again, or at least be mentioned. The other aspect, though, is that despite the absolute cruelty and lack of empathy that either of these people have, Anne still clearly has an investment in Anby. She believes that she is the perfect outcome of her experiment, or is in some way her perfected work. Not all of that is explicit text, but that is what I'm intuiting from it. But as this line is said, we have this echoing, distant, sort of muffled sound of fighting and screams, presumably the death throes of the rest of Silver Squad. And then this man says, now, go dispose of number 11. She failed to participate in the operation, as we for the first time see in the background Soldier 11 behind Anby's face, which gives us a lot more information as well. This explains why Soldier 11 survived. Soldier 11 survived the destruction of Silver Squad because she was presumably the latest of the line of replicas and had yet to properly join into the operations. She may not have necessarily even finished training, but despite that, they're just saying, we're going to dispose of her, which, not to beat the dead horse of it all, but the amount of cruelty within that is insane. But there's a couple more things we can intuit just from this one detail. One of them being, Soldier 11 probably barely knew Anby, if at all. Based on things like Soldier 11's teaser, I imagine that probably she did have some interactions, probably in her initial training, but Soldier 11 clearly is much younger and more inexperienced than Anby, comparatively speaking. The degree of interaction that they actually had with each other could be quite small, if barely existent at all, and it's just that to Soldier 11, those were her first formative moments, learning how to fight and tactics from someone like Anby. But there's another thing we get here, which I'll actually save for a little later. But as this line is said, we have some of our only glimpses of the failed operation. We see hunched over some rubble, presumably the corpse of another of the soldiers. They were all dead under the rubble, as Anby described, and this is just a glimpse of that. We then cut to another shot of a different dead replica, but this time we can see the hollow, dead eyes, and those sounds of death and destruction and chaos have grown louder. But Anby hasn't spoken up yet, or done anything to stop this guy from continuing to talk. He very matter-of-factly is just saying, the Silver Company research is being shut down, as if he didn't just tell Anby to kill someone. We can only keep one of you, and that is an important detail. We can only keep one of you, and this man and Anne want Anby. She is the perfect one after all, but the big mistake they made here is the fact that this statement essentially says, we will be keeping one of you. We need one of you, but we'll only be keeping one. So if you're alive, we'll be getting rid of the other. And it's in that moment with that last line that something shifts in Anby. Maybe she realizes what she can do to save Soldier 11. Maybe she's just hit a breaking point. But whatever it is, the sounds of death and destruction fade out as the music similarly does, as we shift to look at Soldier 11 in her pod, not conscious. And we then cut to the distraught expression of Anby. She clearly is struggling with what to do here. It's the first time that she clearly has been questioning orders. And the man and Anne just sort of trade glances for a moment. They're clearly surprised at this moment of hesitation from Anby. They were expecting the loyal soldier, but that is not the case right now. Something has changed. But they still try to command her, affirm that this is an order, she has to do this. Anne says, Anby, this is an order. And the man backs her up, saying, Replica number 0, are you defying orders? But Anby does not respond immediately. She takes a deep breath as the focus shifts back to Soldier 11, showing where Anby's mind is at. She's steeling herself for what she needs to do, but it's not what they tell her to. She lifts her blade to her own throat, and where before we saw just her own reflection in the blade, now we see the reflection of these two people, shocked by what she's about to do. We still don't see the eyes of Anne, but this is the first time we see the eyes of this man, and it's just a purely shocked expression. The first sign of any real emotion from him, and the first sign of any kind of worry from her, is when Anby goes against orders. And something about the way that Anne says Anby here, and her expression and gesture outwards toward her, makes me think that Anne did, in her absolutely cruel and detached way, care about Anby to an extent. It's in the darkest, most twisted ways, if at all, but the expression and tone she has is one of concern and worry right now. Of course, that could just be my perfect experiment is about to destroy itself. I can't let that happen. But based on the vibe I get off of her, I feel like there might be just that kernel of twisted love for her creation, if I am correct in assuming that she is essentially the creator of these replicas. But I could be way off base there. It could literally just be the product is destroying itself, but then we shift to just be on Anby's face, and we see that her attention is not on them. She's looking to the side, to the left, which is the direction of Soldier 11's pod. She has lifted this blade to her throat to kill herself because she knows it will save Soldier 11. That's where her focus is. That's where her intent is. This isn't an act of pure defiance for the sake of defiance, but an attempt to save a life. She has lost her entire squad. She has lived a life where if told to, she will kill herself. If told to go on a suicide mission, she will. She has. And now that she's come back as the sole survivor, when told, kill the last remaining person, who might be able to share in this torment with you, she chooses otherwise. She turns her gaze to Anne and the man with absolute hatred. Her expression hardens as she cuts her own throat. We obviously, once again, don't see the action itself, but we have everything to show that it happened. This blood splatter, the sound, and then we see her fall. Framed in the background, Soldier 11 once more. And I'll be honest, in this moment, with how long we were hanging here, I half expected Soldier 11 to wake up, but that didn't happen. But I had that thought that it might. But we see, now that she has fallen, that she has killed herself as far as they can tell. Their steps are slow, not panicked, no real intent behind them, just slow and methodical. As complete even tone, all that shock of that one moment gone. As the man says, we miscalculated. A machine without absolute loyalty is worthless. They thought Anby was the perfect machine, the perfect soldier, something for them to command that would have absolute loyalty, but that was not the case. Anby was her own person. And similarly, Anne seems to have most of her concern already gone from her voice as well, saying, good thing we haven't disposed of number 11 yet. There is something still salvageable about this. Soldier 11 may not be as tested as Anby was, but we still have her. We still have a product of this experiment that we can continue to use. But it's with lines like this that I do feel more inclined to lean into this idea that there was a level of favoritism that Anne had for Anby. When Anby first woke up, that is the name that Anne called her. But here, we have her just referring to Soldier 11 as none other than number 11. Now, of course, that might just be the case because out of universe, just from a metatextual level, Hoyoverse hasn't given a name for Soldier 11, and they didn't want to drop it in an Anby teaser. But I feel like there is an interesting nugget of character that we can get from this incredibly cruel woman, that for whatever reason or in whatever way, she allowed this one kernel of humanity to Anby, and referred to her as such. I talked about in the demo how I felt it was odd that Anby had a name that was officially recognized. But if one of the head scientists was the one who gave that name, it could make an amount of sense. If Anby was the first successful experiment in this replica experiment, and despite the otherwise cruel and unempathetic attitude of the scientists, I would not be surprised if Anne does have this bit of favoritism, this bit of investment in this creation of hers. She clearly doesn't have it necessarily in the same way with the other creations, the future replicas, but Anby was the first one. I don't know what to think of this, but it certainly adds layers. It doesn't absolve any of the actions or intents of Anne or the rest of the scientists, but it just makes things a little more complicated. But it's here before we get too much further that I would like to touch on the thing that I was mentioning I would get to earlier, being that in the version trailer, Anby, alongside the line talking about her comrades being killed under the rubble, was the line, "It was my duty to die for Soldier 11. We now know exactly what she was talking about. She was told, we'll be keeping one of these replicas. We want you. Soldier 11 is disposable. And Anby realized, if I'm out of the picture, Soldier 11 is the one who will survive. So she took it upon herself, whether as the captain of Silver Squad or out of having a good moral compass. She believed it was her duty to, even at the cost of her own life, save one of her comrades. And evidently that gambit paid off. As the man says, we'll use her instead. They were going to keep one of the two. Anby has killed herself. We'll just use the other one we have, even if it's not ideal. And he's already disregarded Anby completely, saying, as for the defect, just dump it somewhere. No real protocol to be had here. He just wants this failure out of his face. But as he says this and walks away, we have this moment that reveals Anby did not quite die. She's on the verge of death. If she was not whatever kind of machine or enhanced clone individual or whatever she is, she probably would have died, but she is not quite dead. You can hear her voice as she just raspily gasps for air a little bit, but still quiet and subtle enough that neither Anne or the man notice. Or, if we want to be especially crack theory about this, which I don't think this is the case, it's just an idea that comes to mind. If Anne was to be the person who disposes of Anby, maybe she did notice, and though she isn't kind enough of a person to actually try to save Anby, perhaps she, seeing Anby is not quite dead, rather than choosing to have her repaired and take her because she is the better option, chooses to dispose of her with the idea that if she survives, then she survives and can live her own life. I don't think that's the case. I think that is giving way too much credit to a cruel monster of a woman, but the thought did occur to me, so I felt only appropriate to mention it in case something like that comes up in her story or whatever. But But it's here where we then cut from Anby dying on the floor to, I believe, Soldier 11 in the shade of a tree in a field, sleeping, head rested on the lap of Anby, as another of the replicas rests upon her shoulder. And we see other replicas in the background. One of them seemingly standing, lounging against the tree, another one sitting against the tree over here. It looks like two over here. This clearly isn't enough to be all the replicas, given that even if not all of them were alive during that last operation, unless they were skipping numbers, there are 12, at least. But regardless, this is a hauntingly beautiful moment. It speaks to this almost sort of ethereal, between-space feeling. Anby is the only one who has her eyes open here. All of the others are resting with their eyes closed, at least as far as we can see, which speaks to me to the fact that though Anby is on the edge of death, she is not dead yet, but she is close enough that she is here with all of her dead comrades, just for a moment. And of course, Soldier 11 isn't dead. She's still alive, but depending on if she has even properly woken up yet, it could be seen as the fact that she, in a manner of speaking, has not yet truly been born. So in this between space, between life and death, all of her comrades, the other numbers between 0 and 11, are dead. They have already passed on. And Soldier 11 is coming into reality as a newborn person, in a way, potentially. And Anby is here for a moment in this moment between life and death, where she's hanging on by a thread, and there can just be this peaceful moment where she can comfort and protect Soldier 11 as she is there with all of her comrades. But then we fade out to her face, eyes closed, in reality, as we hear the sound of footsteps approaching, and we hear the voice of Nicole saying, "I have a feeling there's a hidden treasure around here." Nicole, presumably, is in like a junkyard or something like that, rummaging around for valuable goods and stuff. A very Nicole move, and in a manner of speaking, she's right. She is finding a very, very valuable treasure, in a manner of speaking. To the scientists, it's an invaluable test subject. But to someone like Nicole, someone who claims to be motivated by nothing but money and be cold-hearted, but who actually is a deeply caring person, she has just found someone she can save, someone who she can have a deep bond with, someone who can become a close friend, family even, based on the fact that Anby seems to take her last name. And as Nicole approaches, Anby opens her eyes weakly. She's still hanging on by a thread, but she's able to wake up and weakly look at the person who has approached. And then we enter Anby's perspective as she slowly opens her eyes and looks up at Nicole. And Nicole says, is this supposed to be my treasure? And interestingly enough, we don't see Nicole's eyes here yet. She has this cute little reaction, which shows that even if Anby is not necessarily someone who will lead to an explicit monetary gain for Anby, she still views finding someone on the edge of death who she can save as a treasure in a way. Perhaps she has it in the back of her mind that, oh, I can save this person and then they'll owe me big, but I don't know. I think Nicole is kinder of a person than that. She might try to justify that later as the case, but she's a bleeding heart at the end of the day. But I do find it interesting that we don't see her eyes, where before I was interpreting the lack of eyes as the disconnection and lack of empathy of the scientists. We know for a fact that that is not the case for Nicole. She is a caring person. She saves Anby here, and they become incredibly close. But I feel like the interpretation of not seeing the scientist's eyes, it feels correct. So perhaps the intention here is that this is Anby's first moment interacting with a person who isn't just going to use and abuse her as a test subject or soldier or tool, and so she isn't necessarily to a position where she knows if she can trust her. She doesn't know if she can reach that person behind the face. And so perhaps there is that level of distrust. She has spent her entire life not being able to make that eye-to-eye connection, view into the soul of the person she is with, that she isn't even looking for it in this moment. Though she may be in part of her mind yearning for such a connection, she has grown used to not having it, so she does not seek it out actively necessarily. But I don't know, I might just be looking way too into it, and it might just be they didn't want to show her face. But that's my best interpretation to make it sort of fit with what I was talking about earlier. But that is where they ended. That is where we are left, and I absolutely love this. It's exactly what I was hoping for from Anby's teaser. It tells us so much without just blatantly giving us everything. There is still enough tidbits for us to explore in her agent story, while also giving us a lot of answers that we probably would never have gotten otherwise. And potentially even has introduced another character of some kind, whether they're an NPC, a playable character, an antagonist, whatever they may be. We have the introduction of a relevant name and face that we didn't have before. And I'm really excited about that. Of course, everything here is absurdly cruel and brutal, but it makes for good lore and good story. But other than that, I don't really have too much more to say, so I think I will leave it there. Feel free to like and subscribe, leave a comment on your thoughts, and I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.